Hi there. I just got finished grading and reading all the posts for the discussion board, being a part of an evaluation team. And there were so many great responses. And I thought there were six different groups, so not everybody got to read all the responses of everybody. So I wanted to just take an opportunity and just share a couple of those responses, because I think you guys said it as well as I could say it. And so I'm going to go ahead and go through and share some of those key points that people made while they were doing the discussion posts. So the first one was from Macy. As the intervention specialist, I have to paint the entire picture as to who the student is and where they fall in all categories. I have to give background information on the student, discuss the student's strengths and weaknesses, give assessment data as to where they fall in all academic domains, compare their assessment data to same-age peers, and talk about their interests and non-academic extracurriculars. I think the key point here is paint the entire picture. When we think about assessment, oftentimes we think about just one snapshot of data, one piece of information. What you want to do is make sure you're thinking about a whole photo album with lots of different snapshots in it so that you can get a big picture of what that student is like. The next quote I have is from Heather. I would gather as much information from the current general ed teacher as well as previous teachers. They have to see if there's a pattern of success or to see if it has been continuous. Using the child's strengths, emergent skills, and areas of deficit, the team can use that information to create the student's IEP. And both those points that she made are just so important to get information from all the gen ed teachers. And hopefully they're a part of that ETR and they understand how valuable their input is into that ETR. Also, it's important that you get certain type of information because you're going to use that ETR for writing the IEP. And if the ETR is lacking information, then the IEP cannot include that information. Another quote is by Susie. For an initial evaluation, I will want to make certain that I get an objective and complete picture of the student's abilities related to their educational performance. This information will need to be presented in a clear, concise manner, including behaviors observed, and I will need to quantify frequency, duration, and intensity of that observed data. And I think that the key point from this that I want to make sure everybody is aware of is that complete picture, but also that it is objective, so that you're always using objective language. You're always using quantifiable data. You're using anecdotal records that are showing you objective information. Another quote is from Ashley. I would have to make sure that the assessments I use are reliable and have high validity. I will also have to make sure that I keep in mind the test-related factors like anxiety and motivation that might impact validity. This will help ensure that the data gathered is accurate and that the interventions I recommend benefit the student. So when we think about reliability and validity, sometimes you will not have control over what assessments are being given to the students. However, you do have the right to question the reliability or the validity of certain assessments if you feel that there is some bias involved in that or something that whether it is not an appropriate assessment for that particular student. I also wanted to point out what Whitney said. Advice that I would give those that have not been involved in the ETR process is to provide your team with as much information as possible. This will enable them to make better decisions for their students. So I always would like to err on the side of too much information rather than not enough information. And oftentimes, I think that's what happens. People get busy, they just quickly write a report, and they don't go in depth into what they've observed and what they know about that child. So I think that's a very important point. Kayla also wrote, the first step that I would take would be to start by discussing the strengths of the student. During an ETR, I think it's important to try to start the conversation off on a positive note so that the family knows you see their child as a whole and that you do recognize their strengths. I think the most important thing for me during ETRs and the biggest piece of advice would be taking time to listen to the family. So the family knows their child best. No matter how many hours you spend with a student, the family knows that child best. And you want to make sure that you're listening to that family about things that are going on at home that may or may not impact their learning and also may be exhibited at home and also at school. Another point Melissa made is I would first observe the student in the classroom setting and obtain work samples from his or her general ed teachers. I think this is a great point to be maybe go into that gen ed classroom and see what typical students are doing, as well as the student who is being evaluated to determine whether he or she is eligible for a disability. Leslie makes the point that the most important thing in filling out this form is to be honest and transparent as possible so that the ETR team has better understanding of where to go. It's important to remember that many of the people on this team likely do not see the student every single day, so it's extremely helpful to provide them with background information. I would like to emphasize that a lot of times the ETR meetings are led by the school psychologist or the counselor, and they have met that student a number of times, but it probably doesn't compare to the number of times that the intervention specialist has seen the student or been involved with that student, as well as the gen ed teacher. Gina makes a point. First, I would observe the student in many different settings. I would make sure to observe him or her in reading and math class to see where they have the most difficulty, and if one or both of those settings trigger behaviors. I would also observe them in social situations, such as recess or lunch, and see how they interact with their peers. This goes along with that same theme of trying to get the whole picture or the whole photo album of that student. Observe the student in different settings. Ronna Lee says, as a part of the evaluation team, it is our job to be objective in all aspects of the evaluation. This is so important, using that objective language, using an objective mindset. I tried to give baseline information that same age peers should be able to do, and then where the student currently is. This is so important to gather that baseline information and how it compares to the peers, especially when you're writing an IEP. You have to have that included in your PLOF. Also, Erin says, when testing a child, I would try to observe how they attack questions, if they skip over questions, if they disregard something, if they have a negative attitude toward the subject, if they show unwillingness to try, how their ability to recall information is. It's totally appropriate to take notes on behaviors and attitudes of students while they are being assessed. This can be important when we're deciding how reliable that assessment is and whether it's a true representation of that student's ability. Terry writes, when discussing behaviors, include the good and bad day appearance so that parents and team can realize there are multiple aspects to a child. When describing the assessments, use the data that can be easily explained to parents. Most importantly for me to learn was to include the same age peer information and Ohio Learning Standard expectations for the grade level to compare your child with others. And again, all that information is important when you're writing the IEP, and it must be included in the ETR. And finally, Emma writes, the advice I would give to my peers when completing ETRs would be to use a wide variety of source information to be able to answer questions accurately. It is also important to provide a lot of information. And I mentioned that earlier, that it's so important to have a lot of information and provide a big picture of the student. So I just wanted to share those comments with everyone. Everyone did an excellent job participating in this discussion board, and I thought I would just share some of the more poignant posts that people made. Thanks so much for listening.